Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tatiana Show. We are almost done with January in 2018. I feel like it was just 2017 yesterday. I'm really happy to be here with you on the show today. I've got my co-host, Josh Shigala, who's on mute. Josh, unmute yourself so you could say hi to the audience today.
G'day, Tatiana. Good to see you again. And hello, welcome all our wonderful listeners around the world. We always have such good people that share all our content, so it's really great to see you back watching another episode. Got some good guests today.
I know, I'm pretty excited. We've got a lot of topics to cover, but before we jump in, any thoughts on the market? Any thoughts on crypto before we dive in? I was just on with, well, really quick, I want to give a soft plug to the Bitcoin CPA, Kirk. I was just on with him this morning, and we were looking at what was going on with our accounting stuff. So, yeah. In between the markets being low, I'm also dealing with accounting nonsense. But how about you? What's your thoughts? I think it's going up from here.
Well, I'm loving that the whole crypto scene has started to just chill for a little bit and move sideways, if not a little bit down. Well, it's not like it was in December, right? Which was just going nuts. It was out of control. And I'm always worried
I hate when the price goes up. It's
movements
awful
across the whole market. Well, you know, when you have markets that are only going up, you don't know when it's just going to instantly crash. And as they say, you take the stairs up and the elevator down. So it's always good to see a market. It's corrected a little bit and now it's moving sideways. So we're ready for another big jump up. I'd say, soonish. So we'll see. I'm also really watching this Tether thing very closely, as that's sort of could be tricky. And that's why, look at Tether's some weird abstraction of a shit coin called the USD. So it's of a pre-mined, the USD is some pre-mined debt-based centralized nonsense coin. And then
tell us how you really feel.
And then you've got Tether, which is this abstraction on top of that, which is totally unallocated and you don't know what's happening there. But we're getting a lot of people trading on Vaultoro because they'd rather you go into allocated gold, of course, and that's also like a stable way of holding value and then going back to crypto when you need to. But watching these markets unfold, I'm really happy with how it's going. It's moving sideways. It's just boring and a little bit down, which is annoying.
Yes, well, that was wonderful. We've been trying to work on Josh's internet, and last week we had problems. He told me he would get an Ethernet, but his port didn't work. So, Josh, you're cutting out again. Next time I'm going to get the hook for you. Why don't we just skip your attempts at talking to the audience for now and invite our first guest on? I'm sorry that that's still not worked out. Richard Jacobs has been on the show before. He just has a podcast called the Future Tech Podcast that I was on previously, and he's interviewed a whole bunch of different people. He is based down in Texas, and I'm really excited because we're going to hang out in a couple weeks, February 16th, 17th, and 18th in Dallas for the Bitcoin Super Conference. Go to bitcoinsuperconference.com to find out more. So, Rich, welcome to the show. It's nice to see you.
Yeah, hey, Tatiana. Thanks. How you doing?
Okay, well, I'm actually not seeing you, just to be clear. So people at home aren't confused when they're looking at the video saying, I can't see this guy. Rich has no video today. And but you are here with information. So this thing is much bigger than you ever expected. We talked about the conference just a few months ago. Can you tell the audience really quickly what they're missing out on if they're not going to be in Dallas February 16th through the 18th this year?
Yeah, we try to create a great conference that showcases all the things that blockchain can do. I didn't want to focus it on ICOs. I wanted to focus it on existing companies that are doing things in the space. So we've really got a wide range of people coming, for instance, Stratus, who's been around for quite a long time. We've got Tim Draper speaking. We've got James Altucher, who's kind of a strange addition. He's like a crypto guru online.
Time out, like Altucher, the guy that has the big podcast?
The big hair and the big podcast, yeah.
Okay, so I like his podcast, but I don't know. Is he really a crypto expert? I feel like he's maybe a Johnny-come-lately, but he's a really big name, and I really like his work. Is he good at crypto stuff? Now that I've insulted your guest?
No,
I'm serious. Like, does he know about that stuff?
He's an insatiably curious guy, and he's been successful in all kinds of markets where he had zero experience. So I think he'll really bring something to the table. He's He's very unusual. He's not like a traditional crypto guest, but
I love him. I think he's really
great.
great. I listen to very few podcasts, but his I turn on from time to time, which is pretty much the pinnacle of my podcast listening that you can get, aside from Sovereign Tech and Sex and Science Hour. But that's a whole other plug.
I think he'll be. I think he'll be interesting. He'll be good. And then we have Lynn Obrecht. Ross Obrecht's mother. She's coming to speak. So we have there's a huge range of people coming and a big range of topics. So I think people will get a lot out of the conference. I think they'll really enjoy it.
I think so. Are there any more tickets available?
No, the main event, I tried to keep it small because it was my first effort. So I marketed it like crazy, which worked, but we sold out at 900. And then I had to open up a second event, which I, called the Soft Fork, just to be silly. That's about a mile away at the Sheraton, and that's getting close to being filled up. So I mean, people are really like rabid and fiending for crypto knowledge. When we sold out the first event, I probably got over 500 emails saying, please get me in. So that's why we opened up a second event, and it's just been going crazy, which is great.
Well, I'm very happy to be a part of it. And I know that some of my friends are going to be down there. It's always good to get down to Texas too. I'm a big fan of Texas people. Great. Okay.
Got a great podcast too.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, for sure. So is there anything else that you want to tell our listeners about other than to tease them with a conference that they can't even get tickets for?
Well, yeah, we still have tickets. We're about 16 days out. So we've got tickets for the Soft Fork. I don't want people to think it's a lesser event. So what we're doing is we're live streaming from the main event to the Soft Fork. And we've got 30 some odd unique speakers for the Soft Fork. And people will get the recordings for both events, all the video recordings. And there's some booths at the Soft Fork. So, and the last item is people that are at the Soft Fork event can go to the main one at 6 p.m. because we'll have evening parties. So it's not really a lesser event. I've done everything I can to make it at least equal, if not better. So don't feel like, oh man, I can't get to the main one, because you can at 6 p.m. both days and still participate.
Very cool. Well, I'm super excited. We'll have to figure out, I got to call your team. I owe them some slides, and maybe we'll find a place for me to sing a song or two. I know I'm going to be doing a talk about, art and cryptocurrency, but I always like to sing for everybody. So I think me and your partner were talking about that last time. I got to follow up. Yep. Anywho, well, thank you so much for coming on to the show and telling everybody about it. And I'm really excited to see my Texas friends. So everybody, if you want to find out more information, go to bitcoinsuperconference.com. And once again, that's February 16th, 17th, and 18th in Dallas. So thanks for joining us today. And we'll see you in just a few weeks.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Rich. Have fun.
Cool. So going right along here, I think that's going to be fun. I wish you were actually in America.
Oh, man, I wish I was going to talk at that conference, and I just didn't have time there. So there was another conference here in Europe.
Yeah, you know what? I feel like there's so many conferences right now. It's really hard to know which ones are good. Like the one in Poland, this guy, David Kustra, put it on, and he totally screwed over all the speakers. So, don't go to those conferences. Go to the good ones. Yeah. And I think that's going to be one of the good ones. So I think
anything
it's
called the
to,
super conference is going to be good, right? I mean,
well, no, because people can call it anything they want. Doesn't mean that it's good. But yes, I mean, I like to go with people I know. Anyway, let's move right along to our next guest, Michel Kelly from the MEI Institute, Montreal Economics Institute in Montreal. Me and Michel met at Freedom Fest, I believe, a year ago, and he was so kind. He invited me to the Atlas event that was in New York, which is, I think, pretty much the pinnacle of libertarian events. And it was really, really swanky, beautiful. And I visited him and his team over at the offices up in Montreal when I just did a conference there a couple months ago. And Michel is very, very interesting and does a lot of different things. So welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Very cool. So, tell our audience a little bit about your background and how you ended up at MEI. And I'm excited because we're going to talk about Canadian healthcare. But, what are your qualifications? Like, what's your experience with economics? How does one know what's good and what's not in healthcare? Tell me a little bit about your background. That'd be great.
Yeah, well, I'm not an intellectual or a researcher myself. My only skill set really is that I'm good at fundraising. And so because I was able to raise funds on a regular basis, I was able to hire some super people who they themselves know how to make research and communicate it. So I'm basically just the fertilizer that allows for things to happen.
The fertilizer, nice. So tell us what got you interested in this space. How did you?
Sure.
A lot of people have different journeys.
Yeah, but back in 1997, I spent 2 or 3 months in Washington, D.C., and I saw the impact that think tanks were having. You know, there were so many think tanks of so many types. And back in Quebec, there was nothing, and certainly no free market think tank. So when I came back, I just basically decided to start one. And there was one that was already there, and I basically helped with other people to restart it. And although we're libertarians, most of the people who work there, including myself, I wouldn't call our organization a libertarian organization. I mean, it's not a communist organization, but it's not. It's a sort of a moderate, right of center, pragmatic think tank, and we did it that way on purpose because we thought it could have more impact.
So we hear these think tanks all the time, but what is a think tank for all those people at home? What do they do? Do they just sit in a tank and think?
No, I mean, in essence, you know, we do research on different topics, but more importantly, once that research has been completed, we make it available to the general public. So for instance, we have a sense that our material reaches out about 9.2 million Canadians each week through different channels. And so really it's about producing serious research, and serious research is serious research, you know, whether if it's libertarian or not libertarian. Facts are facts, I believe. So first you got to get your facts straight. And then after that, it's about disseminating that research to the general public so that they get corrected in their mind about a couple of sometimes cliches or false informations out there, where people have too much reliance on big government based, again, on things that are just factually inaccurate. So that's essentially what we try to do.
Wow. Okay. So so I saw you at this talk, and you're talking about raising money for people, and everybody's always interested in, you know, how do you raise more money? Some of the crypto people, they're like, well, just make it. but you know, the libertarian people are still looking how to get grants and stuff like that. And one of the things that you sort of touched on was, what are the things that people who are making donations, what are they looking for? Before we jump into the healthcare discussion, would you be able to sort of outline a few things that someone should keep in mind when going to someone asking for either a donation or investment in their organization or in their nonprofit?
Sure. I mean, I have a 2-hour course that I give in New York City each November, and it's free if you register. So come on down, as they say in the show. But you know, what I could say in sort of 2 or 3 minutes, the real basic, which is obvious but forgotten by many, is first of all, take your potential donor as an actual human being you're interested in, as opposed to a big walking ATM machine. And because a lot of people, you know, they say, okay, ooh, this person is rich. This person potentially has the same interest that I do. So therefore, I'm going to go straight. I'm going to try to pitch, and I'm going to try to get some funds. And that's just not how it works. Whereas if you create a genuine conversation and get to identify the interest of the people, then, you know, it's a relationship that overall will pay if you're able to find that cross point between what you're looking for and what you want to do and what is their interest. So again, what I'm saying is very basic, but often forgotten.
I think so too. And also, I think you had mentioned sort of giving them an idea as to what their investment was and, you know, what they're going to actually get in terms of that. One of the things that I thought was really neat at the Atlas event was they were saying that for every $5, they were helping somebody get out of poverty based on like their work. So that was really powerful, those numbers. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, you know, it's important to be able to do, when you have a project, it's important to be able to do at least two columns One is outputs, the stuff you're going to do, and the other one is outcome, what is going to be generated by the stuff that you're going to do. And again, even though that's very basic, more often than not, I find people who come to make pitches, say for the foundation that I have, and they talk a lot about the stuff that they're going to do, but there's little relation between that and the outcomes it's going to generate, or that they think it's going to generate. So you got to be able to articulate those potential outcomes and then track them, measure them in a fair and honest way, and then report back on it. And I think if you, again, care about your donor, about his potential interests, and if you're able to articulate your outputs and outcome, it doesn't mean you have it made, but at least you're on a good path.
So it's almost a little bit like a regular business, right? You know, anybody's going to invest in anything. They need to know exactly what they're going to get for their investment. I guess it's not something that people necessarily think of.
The only nuance I would make is that in our line of business, there is a component a little bit more on the aspect of emotion, of what kind of emotion, what you're going to do is triggering into the donor, as opposed to when he purchases a product or a service. So there is a component that's similar to a normal business, but I would say the emotional component is maybe a little bit bigger.
Okay, cool.
Definitely.
Okay, so tell us, healthcare in Canada. I thought it was so great, but yet they come to America to get their medical services if they need something real done. So tell me a little bit about this. I saw did you ever see that movie? I think it's called like Getting Sicker and Sicker or something. It was a film about it was a libertarian film put out maybe within the past 5 years about the healthcare system in Canada. And it was so terrifying to me because every person they introduce you to in the movie is dead at the end of the movie. And at the end of the movie, they're like, okay, this one died. I mean, it sounds like almost like morbidly funny, but it wasn't funny at all. It was awful. Do you know which film I'm talking about? I bet you do.
Yes, I do. I will say my intro to that topic is that Canadian healthcare system is not as good as what American liberals think, but it's not as bad as what conservative thinks.
Okay.
You know,
it's balanced.
Because the fact that if you basically where you get really shitty outcomes is when you have, you know, the so-called elective surgery or elective medical needs, meaning a medical need that is not life-threatening. Then you know you can be set to wait for a really long time, because in essence, like any socialist systems, they control their costs through waiting lists. That's how you do. If you don't have a price mechanism, what else can you do in order to control your costs? Well, one of the ways is you make people wait. And in Canada, we wait for non-urgent medical stuff. We wait a really long time. And sometimes that non-urgent medical thing, you know, can be like a back pain that's really going to mess your life for several months, and in some cases for several years. So I think, you know, what I say to people is that if Americans want to get away from their current healthcare system, and I'm not going to make an opinion about whether they should or they shouldn't, the Canadian healthcare system is absolutely not the way to go. There are much better systems around the world. Personally, my favorite one is the Swiss system. Swiss healthcare system, I think, is a reasonable compromise between market forces and a certain level of, let's say, helping people who couldn't otherwise pay for their healthcare.
Yeah, the German system's pretty good too. You know, it's insurance. There is still, through the gaps, you get picked up by the state.
Yeah, and our institute has made studies on the healthcare, on the German healthcare system, and I would agree with you. I would rank it among the top 5 in the world.
What makes it a good system? Because I mean, okay, if you're purely libertarian, right, or anarchist, I guess a lot of people might be listening, might be kind of falling into that category. the market should be able to provide in the best way possible, and then charity would serve the needy. Why do you diverge from that hard line, which is generally pretty adhered to? Where would the variance be? Would it be just to appease certain people, or what is the benefit of having the state involved at all?
It could warrant a 2-hour answer.
Sorry.
What I will say is this: when a society is organized in a certain way, and whether you like how it's organized or not, when it's organized in a certain way, to undo things is not that simple and sometimes dangerous. Once the toothpaste is out of the toothpaste, it's hard to put it back in. And so you have around the world, including in Germany, including Canada, even in the US, societies that are structured with a high level, and your libertarian friends listening now are not going to like what I'm going to say, but you have societies that are organized around a lot of government structures. And when you want to go back the other way, you can do it, but you have to do it in a prudent and structured way.
But there's also these problems. So, for instance, a lot of the unions, doctors' unions, will force legislation to be like, if you want to be a doctor, you have to study. You can't study night school. You force you're basically just allowing rich people, because they can afford to study, to become a doctor. But then you've also get these unions to say, oh no, you need a doctor to take a swab of the tongue and put it in a petri dish and send it off. You can't have a nurse do that. So you're causing all this demand for doctors that doesn't need to be there. So the prices then go up for services that actually a nurse could do. And I think these are some of the issues that are weighing down private-centric healthcare systems.
I totally agree. In the same way, pharmacists could do a lot more. If you've been having allergies every spring, why the hell do you need to go to a doctor in order to get the prescription you need? I mean, this is totally ridiculous. Yeah. This is pure corporatism.
Yeah. Do you see do you see a path for less government involvement in Canada or in any other country for that matter in terms of their healthcare? I mean, I think that the trend for governments is to just keep doing the wrong thing over and over again until their head is in a million pieces and just keep doing the same thing. I don't see sort of a pullback. They're like, oh, this isn't working. Maybe we should try something else. They don't generally do that. And in a place like Canada, everybody's saying, we love our healthcare. And why do they love their healthcare? Why? Can they not tell that it's bad, or is it something that's kind of shown to Americans so we end up trying to get universal healthcare too? Like, why are so many people happy with it, or is that a misconception? And how do you work your way back?
Well, part of it is because once you're inside the system, you actually get quite reasonably good care. Again, there are problems, but I mean, it's not true that the Canadian healthcare system is a third world healthcare system. Once you're in, you get competent doctors, competent nurses, and so forth. So that's one part. The other part I would say is ideology. Canadians, ever since they've been in their cradle, have been told that socialized medicine is an absolute important component of Canadian healthcare. And I mean, of Canadian way of life, of Canadian identity. So, when you have a dominant ideology that's been shoved into the mind of people since their childhood, it's very difficult to undo.
Would you say that one of the problems, I think, defining a good healthcare regime isn't in that moment? For instance, you can have a fantastic healthcare that just runs perfectly, but eventually you run out of other people's money. And so then it starts going downhill, and you see amazing healthcare, and then it's slowly over years and years. So people go, our system is the best in the world because everyone's taken care of. But you give it 10 years, all of a sudden it's a nightmare, or 20 years or 30 years. So the long tail.
And it's especially true what you're saying when you have technological innovation, which normally actually should be a plus and is a plus. But the way the socialized medicine is structured, it actually becomes something that undermines the system because of cost issues. Because normally, let's say you had a new drug, if you had a private system, at first, just like in luxury cars, only the rich people would have access to that particular type of medicine. But over time and in fairly quickly, it would become available to a lot of people just because costs would go down. But when you have a socialized medicine where the logic is either it's available to everybody at the same time or it's available to nobody, then there's a lot of new drugs and new innovation that you actually don't get. And that's one of the problems of one of the many problems of the Canadian healthcare system.
Also,
do you see those?
Aren't doctors not really incentivized? Because if they can't make big money, why would they pursue that as a, you know what I mean? Wouldn't the best doctors just go to countries where they can get paid more money?
Well, yes, but actually, you know, if you're a medical specialist in Canada, in several provinces, you get paid pretty good. And you don't have a lot of the hustle of having to collect your clients, which people in a real private system have to. And I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that's something they have to do. These are admin costs they have to integrate into their compensation, which in Canada, the government does it for them. So in that sense, you know, actually, the doctors, for the most part, have it pretty good. You know, and that's the problem is that, you know, there are a lot of bad features, but overall, there are a lot of people who benefit from the way it's currently organized. So much so that even the most right-wing or conservative or libertarian politician, no matter how you want to call it in Canada, they are afraid to talk about healthcare reform. They rarely do. It's a taboo topic. You know, it's very difficult. But the good news is, and this is maybe for another show, another time, there are some reforms that are happening right now, right here, right now. So we are slowly on the path of improvement and of more choice and more competition.
Would you say that it seems like the Canadian government is a little bit more reasonable than the United States government? Like if you look at the Andreas Antonopoulos talk that he gave to, I guess, Congress there, and they were really very forward thinking and very open-minded compared to many, many other countries in the world. Maybe we all need to move to Canada.
Well, you know,
there. I don't know. I mean, yeah, healthcare, whatever. But if everybody's generally happy with it, I mean, it's bad for the people who have the serious diseases, and I'm glad to hear an improvement. But it seems like why is Canadian government doing better than the U.S. government? They don't seem to be as oppressive and annoying.
One university professor once told me, it doesn't matter how much you screw up. It matters how much you screw up relative to others. And so the Canadian government, in my opinion, is screwing up big time on a lot of topics. But relative to many other governments in the world, including the American government in many cases, it screws up relatively less. So Canada is a relatively less fucked up country than many other countries. Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah, you can curse. We don't care. No, but I mean, that's pretty much the only way to describe it. And that's pretty interesting. It's like your one abuser isn't as bad as the other abuser, but the other abuser is still taking your lunch money. And it's hard to compete with the U.S. We're number one in hurting people. It's such a disappointment.
You might have a wall.
Well, I don't know.
Canada might put up a wall.
You know, the wall could be used to keep people in too, but I don't know. What a bummer. Anyway, this has been really neat. Michel, where can people come and connect with you and find out more about your work and see maybe some of those studies that you talked about? Are you coming up and speaking anywhere? Maybe something you want to plug?
Yeah, well, we have all sorts of activities. There is a secret software that I have to share with you guys. It's called Google. And if you go on Google and you type Montreal Economic Institute, you'll find out everything about me, about us, and you can follow us and become our friends. And we would love to.
Excellent. I like that. And you guys are going to get a little bit more involved in cryptocurrency, I think, this year. Have you started accepting donations in crypto yet?
Absolutely. It's on our site now. It's operational. So we, and we're gonna think how to reach out. But yes, because I think in Canada and certainly in Quebec, we would be the closest thing to an ally to the cryptocurrency community. We've done research and work in the past on that topic, and we now accept donations in Bitcoin. And we're gonna have an outreach and a continuation of our work. Now, our work on it has been really to sort of say, how should governments, quote unquote, regulate Bitcoins in order to make it, easier for it to be more accepted, which we took a little bit of a flack from certain people who didn't like that approach. But I think in practice, that's one of the best ways to move it forward. A little bit like Japan, that has taken, I think a constructive approach. So that's what we're trying to say, is to basically make those cryptocurrencies in a way mainstream by having a proper framework for it. But that does come with a certain amount of government regulation.
Well, I think, so I have a really good friend, Perry Ann, at the Chamber of Digital Commerce. She's come on the show. We're actually doing, I'll be down at her event March 7th and 8th down in DC. And, at first I was a little bit averse to her organization because they work so closely with government, but government is really made up of people and, maybe some wackos, but, there's also regular people that believe that they're doing some good work. And she's been a great advocate of the cryptocurrency industry with the government, because if you don't offer them alternative solutions, they're only going to be hearing the bad negative news, and they're not necessarily going to get a good understanding of the nuance of the cryptocurrency industry and the development of blockchain tech. So I think it's a little bit similar, right? You guys are just offering some insight to government agencies that maybe you get somebody over there who actually can listen to the voice of reason and make some changes. So I really appreciate all your work and your friendship too. So I hope we get to hang again, and maybe I'll make my way up to Montreal this summer because it was a little bit cold before, but it's a really beautiful city.
Thank you. Love it. And thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you very much for coming on. Cool. So
Thank
Josh,
you,
we're having a good show today. I feel like everything's moving along nice.
We don't only have great guests, we've also got fantastic. And the Bitcoin CPA, you mentioned it before, really important, especially for Americans. The American government loves to throw people in prison. So, how do you make sure that you don't accidentally end up there? You make sure you do your taxes, even though we all hate them. I hate them. It's horrible. But
taxation is theft.
Taxation is definitely theft. If you're going to have to do it, then do it properly through someone like the Bitcoin CPA. Also, who else have we got on our sponsor list? We've got so many good.
We have a lot of friends of the show. I want us to give a shout out to Sex and Science Hour. I love that podcast. Sovereign Tech. Brian over there, he's making some funny, cool content with tech stuff.
Great stuff.
MK Lords is making some nice content. Icono SAS. And Zencash isn't one of my sponsors, but I'm giving them a holler because they're my peeps. They work with me over at Crypto Media Hub, and we really like working with those people over there. So we've also
stuff. I really love it.
Don't forget our friends at Crypto Compare though, because they are putting out all the hot news on Twitter. I've been retweeting them, so getting all the crypto. I've been looking in the background at the charts. By the way, they're not doing good. Bitcoin is under 10,000, so it's on sale now.
It's on sale, and not only that, but with Crypto and Compare, you can actually compare gold to all your cryptos. So you can price your crypto in gold. You don't need to price it in USD. You can actually price it in a globally recognized store of value. And that's what we're all hoping for, is that we get away from fiat debt-based.
Yeah, no one likes.
So who have we got next? we've got a fantastic guest on next.
So our next guest is Rayford Davis, who works with an organization I'm a really big fan of. Law Enforcement Against Prohibition was how they used to call it. known as LEAP, but now it's the Law Enforcement Partnership organization. I don't know why it's, Law Enforcement Action Partnership. Okay, I was trying to figure out what the LEAP was. And this is a really cool organization because, as you know, I'm really into ending the drug war, a big friend of Russ Ulbricht, and that's sort of opened my eyes to a lot of the problems that we have with our justice system. And I think it's really neat when we get to hear about people from law enforcement that have, on the ground experience administering the drug war and sort of seeing what that does to communities. So I know Neil Franklin because of Lynn, but Neil isn't on the show. We're making a new friend today, Rayford. And Rayford, thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to have you and to hear your story.
I appreciate the opportunity, Tatiana.
Oh, my pleasure. It's always an opportunity for our audience to learn more about this. So maybe you could give us a little bit of your background and sort of how you ended up doing something that's maybe a little bit counterintuitive to the average person's opinion of, what does law enforcement think about the drug war? So give us a little bit of background. I'd love to hear it.
Right. So I was a police officer with the city of North Charleston in South Carolina, 300-man police force. Our main mission was, get guns and drugs off the streets. I did 4 years on patrol, 2 years in detective division, made hundreds of arrests, many of them drug related. I began to get a little disillusioned with, the drug enforcement, and it's very clear, hey, it wasn't working, whatever we were doing. My law enforcement career got cut short. I was hit by a truck directing traffic and broke my leg. Oh, and so, man, that forced me out of policing, and then once I was out and kind of stepped away from it, I really got to dive deep and just see kind of just how destructive a lot of, even though well-intentioned, policing was, particularly with drug enforcement. I became a member of LEAP, which was, law enforcement against prohibition. Their tagline was "Cops say legalize all drugs." And you're like, what? A cop saying legalize drugs? That's crazy. And we have changed, a law enforcement action partnership, and so we still do the same with drug enforcement. Legalize and regulate all drugs, and we also kind of expanded to other kind of policing issues as well. So that's what I saw as a police officer. Just what we were doing wasn't working, and actually created a lot of the crime that we were trying to prevent. It's the same thing we saw with alcohol prohibition in the 1930s. And I was doing the same thing as a police officer on my hometown streets.
Do you think that there's where would the budget go if it wasn't for policing? For the amount of money that's spent on policing drugs, where would that be allocated in your eyes best?
Well, who would be paying for it? Because it's like a big revenue generator as well. I mean, would it be allocated anywhere? It wouldn't even exist if we weren't constantly sucking it out.
Right. Well, you have a lot of that is federal money. And it's kind of run through what they call the ONDCP, Office of National Drug Control Policy. And of course, that is specifically stated to combat drugs. So you're not going to have, it's a huge money machine. It's billions of dollars to kind of perpetuate this. We have like a policing incarceration industrial complex with the courts, with prisons. And let me just put this out real quick, just so people understand just the massive amount of over policing that we have in the United States. And United States is the world's largest incarcerator. We have more people in prison, that's just in total, than any other country, and as a percentage of our population. 2.2 million people currently in prison. We have another 5 million under some type of correctional control like probation or so. You're looking at 7 million people under the thumb of under the criminal justice system. So our numbers, it's about 760, I think, per 100,000 that's currently incarcerated in the United States. And we have Michelle for talking about Canada. Canada's incarceration rate is 114 per 100,000. And that's about the average in Europe as well. So the United States would have to let out 80% of its people that are currently incarcerated just to equal the current incarceration rate in Western Europe and Canada. We would have to reduce our incarceration rate by 80%. So that's the just amazing, absolutely absurd level. Wherever you are, you know, you're conservative, liberal, whatever you think, that's just you know, you just can't. And we're in America. We're the land of the free. And to have those type of rates is just totally unacceptable. Nobody can stand by those and say what we're doing is right.
Those numbers, hearing them, I mean, I'm familiar with the statistics, but every time I hear them, they're so shocking. What I also found really disturbing was the amount of people that were in prison because of plea deals. It's like 97% or something, and only 3% of court trials are won. Like they're 97% approximately in favor of the state every time. So your chances of going to court at all are you know, tiny, you know, 3% or whatever. And then even then your chance of winning are so low. How do people reconcile that? Like working in this space, you know, there's also, you know, a lot of criticism right now of police brutality, which I think is probably because of bad police training, right? So it's really hard to not have this disconnect with the people and the police, but I'm sure that you didn't become a police officer to, you know, bother people and steal from them, which is how a lot of people view the police. So it's unfortunate because police is comprised of actual human beings. So how do you reconcile all of that? And you know, as a side note, I commend you for your work because specifically, I think that's really where you guys are trying to bridge the gap a little bit. So maybe you could speak to that.
Right. So, you know, myself and, you know, vast majority of the people in law enforcement and why we joined was to help people. And, you know, we didn't, you know, want to go out and you know, crack skulls and abuse people. That's not why I joined. And so how does that happen to where we are the world's largest incarcerator? And we actually do abuse a great many people in our course of duties of enforcement. And I'll say most of that abuse is legal and justified, and like you say, how we're trained. So how that works and how you justify that is particularly with drug enforcement, and that's a big chunk of it, is drugs are bad, right? So they, you know, and you see the drug related crime that they talk about. You don't want drug dealers standing on your street or, you know, having fights or doing drive-bys. You want that out of your neighborhood. And so you say, well, we've got to get tough to get them off and to get them off the streets. And so you get tough. And what happens? It gets worse. And you don't quite realize the connection. And so it actually becomes more violent. You have more criminals on the street because you lock more people up. And it's a vicious, perpetuating cycle. And police officers like myself, you kind of take it personally when what you're doing isn't working. So you vow, well, I'm going to get tougher. I'm going to push the limits on, you know, what we can do legally and think those type of things when we deal with people, and, you know, fight for those harder convictions and those longer prison sentences, to send a message and to change things. And of course, you know, we've been doing that since before I was born, you know, in the 1970s. And the numbers are in, it only increases. Drug use and abuse rates have only gone up.
Well, then there's also the problem with all the children, because, you know, I visited Ross in prison, both in the New York one and also in Colorado. And one of the most shocking horrors that I got to witness was all the little kids, you know, they're calling on their daddy saying, no, don't take me away. I mean, they're so happy when they're just cuddling with their father. And, you know, I know a lot of the people, even in that maximum security where Ross is, they're nonviolent. So they're being trained to be more violent. Their household has no father at home. These moms are basically left having to fend for themselves. And this is something that kind of ripples through generations and generations. I mean, there's people in jail for life in Colorado for pot, where everybody's smoking pot everywhere. So it's so horrifying. And people, I think that they just think, oh, they're criminals, they're druggies, and they just discard these people as if they don't have families. And also, if you want to really improve society, you're decimating these neighborhoods for generations that you can't fix that. So I'm not surprised. And also, if I was poor and I lived in a bad neighborhood and I had to feed my family and all I could do was deal drugs because there weren't other opportunities, maybe I didn't know any better. I mean, does that really warrant having to take away the rest of my life because I made a mistake because I thought that I was doing the right thing, trying to provide for my family? I mean, it's not like you have to knock on people's doors to sell drugs. People come to the drug dealer. The drug dealer is not like, it's not like you have to really actually sell it on the street, maybe for convenience sake, but it's like people are looking for them. They're not like, I was walking down the street, I was going to get a candy bar, but yeah, how about some crack? I mean, that doesn't happen. So
right. Yeah, it does. And so, first of all, if you have anybody and you arrest them and that's what I noticed too, you arrest that person, especially a young person, you've criminalized them. You give them that felony charge, that first charge, you have locked them in, to that. And you have basically, it's tough enough growing up in some of these poor and minority communities. It's hard enough as it is. And then when you put a criminal charge on someone, you do things like they get arrested, even if they go to jail for a couple of days and get right back out. You've got that felony charge on them. They probably lost their job. You towed their car. Their family had to put, their last bit of money to bail them out. Right. You took them away from their kids, and we'd take kids away from their parents and put them in social services for, for this, do it all the time. And so you just totally destroy these families. And so anything positive that they would have going on with their life, you just shattered all of that. And so you just put them down into a spiraling path, that they're not going to come out of. And to say, well, they're breaking the law and well, I don't want to, we're paying for this. You're paying, average in South Carolina is about $40,000 a year to incarcerate someone. In New York, it's like $90,000 a year to keep someone in prison. So that's where your tax money is going. And all it's doing is harming the community even more. It's not helping these people, and again, just a mass perpetuation cycle. You lock up somebody's grandfather, like you said, and that affects their grandchildren negatively in their life. And also, for the kind of racial aspect of the policing, we know that law enforcement and historically has been used to oppress minorities and poor people. And the drug war was a continuation of that after the Jim Crow laws and stuff went away, in the 1960s. That it continued surreptitiously under drug enforcement. Yes, of course, the laws apply to everyone, but you really enforce them in those specific communities. And we've been doing that for generations.
Well, think about how on TV, all these kids are like, on just a regular average TV show, people will smoke a joint. So funny. It's like, it's not so funny if you live in the hood and a cop pulls up, because it's like, look, I get a little bit frustrated when we talk about the drug war and we make it only around racial lines, because I think it's something that affects a lot of different people. But to deny that that's a component is total nonsense. Like, I know that I have gotten away with stuff because people aren't going into my mom's neighborhood or, where I grew up. But down the street in Patterson, there were cops there all the time, and they're not even eradicating the drugs in the first place. So, and it's easier to go after the kids in Patterson instead of the kids in Wayne, where, their parents will like complain, and why even go against that? Because you could be pissing off the wrong person. If you go into the neighborhood that's a crappy neighborhood, it might be more dangerous in one way, but in another way, it's easier to enforce the law there.
That's right. And that's some ways how it perpetuates. And a lot of in our department was the same thing. If you were Black, you were 3 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana than if you were white. We worked very hard to try to avoid those type of racial type of disparities. We had very good Black leadership in my department. You know, they didn't tolerate that stuff, yet we still had those same rates. And that's how that drug enforcement perpetuates those racial disparities. And you know, how would law enforcement say, geez, we're locking up, 3 times as many Black people. So how do they fix that? Well, you need to go lock up more white people, you know, and that's how that would filter down and, to try to change things. So would even that be a success where drug arrest rates were racially proportional? And the answer was absolutely not. You know, that wouldn't help very much at all. And again, the violence and everything that you see that is drug related is due to the prohibition enforcement to begin with. I never responded to a shooting between 2 beer distributors. That never happened. To, liquor stores, liquor distributors and wholesalers never had shootouts. Why is that? Substances are just as dangerous, intoxicating, and destructive. It's the criminality. Again, we learned that in Prohibition. And so that continues today. That's why it's being sold in the neighborhoods. Kids, you're worried, well, if you legalize drugs, children will get it. Well, number one, they're getting it now if they choose to do so. Number two, kids were actually specifically targeted to sell drugs because, well, they would, get in less trouble if they caught. They would work cheap and so dealers would target them. Hey, go stand out on the street for me. And they were not selling beer and cigarettes because there's no profit margin in them for them to do that.
They're incentivizing like a kid drug market.
They do. And we've seen the numbers now, particularly in Colorado, that marijuana use rates among children has not gone up at all. And they were, the fear was there'd be zombie hordes, of stoned out high schoolers, and and that is just not even the case. So we've got good evidence and statistics now that use rates have not really changed at all for children.
So Rayford, I could imagine it being pretty harsh when you first joined LEAP in the force. What did other law enforcement agents think about you doing that and your stance on this? And how do you move forward? How do we get more police or law enforcement to join these sort of, how do we get this into the mainstream? How do we change the laws?
That's very difficult. And as a police officer, when you're in there, you're kind of, you're committed. And so you can't even, bring yourself to admit that. And it wasn't until I got out of policing that my mind was able to wrap myself around it and actually say it out loud, even though, we kind of all know the truth. And you ask any police officer, how's drug enforcement? Is it working? And they'll say no. And virtually all of them, you ask about marijuana and they say, yes, of course, marijuana should be legalized. But it kind of, if once you finally come around to that, and stop drinking the Kool-Aid is what I call it. It's kind of difficult to stay into policing when you do that. And so it self-selects. So you have people that are in law enforcement. If they get like us, you kind of get out of it, or you find ways to get away from the drug enforcement itself. And so
that's really unfortunate, because I see that, I that's a big problem in a lot of cases where people are in a bad circle of peers, where it's not a bad circle, the law enforcement is not a bad, but they're surrounded by a certain mindset, and to actually escape that, they have to actually leave, and that doesn't then change the mindset of the whole group, which is unfortunate.
Right. So on a low level, like me, a patrol officer or something, if you came out and said, I think we should legalize all drugs, first of all, you're going against the position of your department. Two, even if, and you can talk to police officers if they agree with you, that's going to limit your ability to be promoted. How are you going to, work in drug enforcement or anything like that? You're kind of pigeonholing yourself. And then on a bigger level, just like even statewide in law enforcement, the heads of your state law enforcement and all are, they know where their bread is buttered. So they can't speak out, and then it invalidates their policing, a lot of what they do.
But wouldn't it, I mean, I would feel invalidated as a police officer if it was this never-ending task of like, I bust one person, I know that they're in prison now, and now I've got another trillion people to bust, because it's just never-ending. So there's no point. It's like a pointless job. And I would feel like, man, I joined the police force to like do some help. Instead, I'm doing this pointless job. And I mean, it must go through their head.
Right. It does. And so what a lot of police officers do is they'll kind of get out of the drug enforcement and try to find, specialties where they don't deal with it. A lot get out. Some double down, like I say, and just get even tougher. And, it is fun. Hey, you get to chase guys and you have that whole cops and robbers thing. This is a good adrenaline thing. And you get paid to do it as well. Yeah. So there's that, and like me, I was in for, 6 years, and then you finally realize, hey, this, really shouldn't be doing this. Morally it's wrong. Constitutionally, it really has no support. Yeah. It's not working. And so you're going to get out or change your career path, your married, kid, car payments and everything like that. And then you're going to,
you're locked in.
Yeah. You're locked in and say, well, I'm going to change my career path for these nebulous kind of moral reasons,
Yeah. Yeah. So what can people do? What can we do as a people? What can other police officers do if they want to share their voice anonymously, or can they, I don't know, is there anything, this movement forward? Because I think it's very important.
Well, when I first joined LEAP, I was kind of scared. I signed up with, with like a fake email. But, I've done hundreds of podcasts and speaking engagements and never had any problems whatsoever. Nothing but pure support from the public and from law enforcement as well. So I've never had any problems. So I know from my personal experience, there's nothing to fear by speaking out. And we know this is the truth. And so I want to help police officers and help them and help our communities. Our communities would be safer. Police officers would be safer. And if we got out of the drug business. And so
absolutely. And I've seen examples where, people that are dealing in illegal substances generally do not have an arbitration service to deal with conflicts. And this is where the violence then steps in. So you get gangs shooting each other because they can't go to court about a dispute. It's really unfortunate. And then they're labeled as this violent, when really it's just like any other. If we had any other industry that was truly illegal, they would have to resort to violence, arbitrate conflict, because there's no way, there's not a third party to go to court to and actually do that non-violently.
Correct.
We've seen examples of this in Portugal. This is the big example where the Portuguese legalized everything, 18 years ago. One of the heaviest drug users, drug problem countries in the world. And now they're one of the least, as far as I haven't seen the latest statistics, but especially things like HIV's gone down, all these sorts of things have gone down, and drug and budgets, and that's why I mentioned budgets at the start, shifted across to the medical side, where a lot more medical treatment was funded to help drug addicts because they have obviously got a medical condition instead of a legal condition.
Right. Portugal's a good example where they decriminalized all drugs. So they do not arrest people, for small amounts. And they took that money and focused it on treatment issues and housing and those type of things. And their drug use rates are lower than America's. Their overdose death rates are much lower than ours. And so you look at those type of things, and what they're doing is working and what we're doing is not. And so Portugal's a great example that people can look at.
So on that subject of sort of, decriminalizing and all that. So Trump is sort of a mixed bag on a lot of different things. Sessions seems super anti-pot, like going bananas with that. Trump seems very pro law and order in general. Do you have any indications about how this administration is going to handle the drug war? We've been, into it for over a year now. Do you have any kind of sense? Because there's been a lot of saber rattling, but I personally haven't seen too many things coming down the pipeline, but I'm sure you have a better idea because you're closer to the problem. Do you have any sense about whether or not this administration will be good or have a positive or a negative impact on the drug war and ending the drug war?
They haven't changed anything so far. It's kind of been the same. So it's just kind of more rhetoric that's changed a little bit. So no major laws or changes. Well,
I guess it's better than ramping it up.
Right. Yeah. Well, I don't know how we could do that. It would be difficult to expand it even more than it is already now.
Well,
how did prohibition of?
No, go ahead,
Sorry,
Josh.
Tatiana.
No, go ahead.
What was the turning point for prohibition of alcohol in America? How did that become then legal again? How did people suddenly decide, no, this is the wrong way to go?
Okay, well, the repeal of the Volstead Act was in 1933. So that's when the federal prohibition was overturned. But you still had states that had various prohibition laws, really all the way up to today. There are certain counties in the United States that are dry counties, that it's not legal to sell alcohol in a few counties still in the United States. So mainly it transferred to the states, and so to say that alcohol just became legal in 1933, it really took another 50 years or more for a lot of the prohibitions. And of course now, it's still highly regulated, from state to state.
Wow. So are you hopeful with all of this? Because it feels a little bleak, I got to be honest.
Well, the tide is building, and you see with marijuana, particularly, like I said, in Colorado, Washington State, California. I think that's the big crack, and that you can see, just a kind of a tide come from that. Like I said, the kids are not, turned into a bunch of zombies. It's being profitable for the states. And we're starting to see that, the more in some states they've legalized it, but just to the point of it's really legal in name only, and it's just insanely regulated, and they're not showing any benefits. So hopefully you'll see a kind of a race to kind of deregulation, and you have a competition among the states to see.
State are you most hopeful for?
That's a good question.
You know what, that really depends on the states. You see states that allow for public propositions to be voted on individually. They seem to be more proactive than states that require legislatures to change the laws. So okay. you see that as well. But I think marijuana is the big deal. 2/3 of illegal drug use is marijuana alone. So if you legalized marijuana,
unbelievable.
If you legalize marijuana, then you would take 2/3 of your illegal drug users off the books, and so you'd basically end 2/3 of the drug war. Right there.
From what I understand, though, which was sort of like the flip side of legalization, was then they sort of set up their own little protectionist rackets. So wherever they legalize, they've got their key vendors. They're like, these guys are okay. And then they try and cut out all the little guys. So even, and actually I have a friend who works in, drug policy reform type stuff. And she says that a lot of the people that were donating to those organizations leading up to the legalization of marijuana were like forking over the dough. But as soon as they got their their aspect into place, their sort of like coverage of their market, they basically stopped contributing to that fight because they like having their little, their little cartel. So it's like, I mean, clearly it's going to be better than putting people into prison over pot. But I think that, overregulation can sometimes create sort of monopolies that may not be so great either, but I guess still better than going to jail.
Right. So locking less people up is always an improvement. But yes, you have seen where states and cities have these obscene, you have to, $500,000 for a permit or something like that. And so, that's just to allow, bigger businesses to run a business and keep out kind of mom and pop type organizations and stuff like that. And also, you still see law enforcement, doing raids and SWAT raids on marijuana dispensaries. And so they're going in, with guns out, still, creating that danger and arresting people in marijuana dispensaries and seizing money and product and sometimes ingesting it. I think it was on the recent news where the cops in Ontario raided a pot shop and then they got a little too high with the edibles or something and had to call for help, I think.
Oh my God, that's so embarrassing.
So something ridiculous like that. It's just so destructive to policing. So you see, even with the legalization of marijuana, you still see law enforcement. They're kind of running their own rackets and generating work for themselves by doing these raids and on these dispensaries when they're not accountable enough for their marijuana or whatever.
How do we bring more accountability into the police departments themselves? Because it seems, you hear about the thin blue line, then you see some Serpico stuff. You're like, oh yeah, they're routing out all the criminals. But I mean, it seems like law enforcement is a really easy place for corruption to take hold. And it seems to be a pretty rampant problem. So how is that like eradicated? Because where's the incentive? If a few dudes are on the take, they're going to tell the little guy who's, more likely than not like going to be as wealthy as people who are on the take. Obviously, if you're getting bribes, you've got a lot of power. So how do you reconcile that? Do you think that simply by kind of taking out the incentive of the drug war in the first place, that would help?
Absolutely. The drug enforcement using undercover informants and that whole kind of dirty business is huge and very corrupting on law enforcement. And so if you get law enforcement to stick to like actual crimes that have, real victims like theft and assault and rape, it's much more difficult for them to run little rackets and to be seizing money from people and everything. But so much of those type of things that law enforcement does that everybody would consider bad, where you have a bad cop on the take and those type of things, that does happen. But the most of the harm, again, that law enforcement does is perfectly legal. And you look at like with civil asset forfeiture, where law enforcement, they just go in and don't even have to charge you with a crime. They just take people's money. Roadside extortions where cops pull people over and you have cash and can't account for what's your account for this $3,000. And they say, well, I was going to buy a used car with it. And they say, no, well, we think you were going to use it to buy drugs. So we're just going to take it. And they do that all the time. Perfectly legal.
It's amazing. To me, it's just amazing.
And how that's considered constitutional, how a police officer, this is what really gets me, is how a police officer that even uses the word, integrity or honor with themselves could do that. But they do it all the time. So that's the biggest theft. It's just straight up legal. They take it. They go into people's homes, take the money, take it out of people's cars, drain people. They drain people's bank accounts. They just take your money from your account and say, well, we think it could have been drug related. And so they take your money.
Brain wallets, people.
Yeah.
Paper wallets.
Unbelievable. And that's part of the, the drug war as well.
Well, yeah, I remember seeing the statistics on that, saying that basically there was more taken from people in civil asset forfeiture than actual.
Yes, that is true. The federal government alone in 2015 seized more money through civil asset forfeiture than was reported in all thefts and burglaries combined. So yes, just the federal government alone is a greater thief. I mean, that's straight up what it is. It's armed robbery.
Wow,
with a badge.
Well,
and that's one of those part of those things of the drug war that that we just have to end.
I mean, I just want to say thank you so much for all of your work toward this, and to all the fellow officers that are kind of working toward this. It's so important, and it's not something that's necessarily going to win you friends in the department at first, but it's so critical, and you make friends with the real people that you're supposed to be trying to protect. And thank you so much for all of your work. Is there anything else that we can share with the audience in terms of how to connect with you guys, upcoming events, how to support you, anything else that you would want to maybe promote? The floor is yours.
Right. Well, you can check out Law Enforcement Action Partnership LEAP, and if anybody want to contact me personally, I'm on Twitter at Rayford D.
Rayford D. I'm going to follow you on Twitter right now. Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Rayford. Thank you to our other guests, Michelle and Richard. It's been really neat hanging out with everybody. And I don't think that we have a show next week because I think I'm in Mexico, but we'll see. Maybe we'll find something to share with everybody. And thank you so much for coming on, and we'll see you all next time.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.